Same for you? Good. Uh-oh. Oh, yes. But, yeah. See, this is when she needed to be in a class about human suffering. Maybe it was not Job, but I get to stand. That's right. I'm not suffering. I think we will go ahead and get started. Thank you, Tim. I think it's safe to say, and I'm always careful when I make. Let me back up. I try not to make generalizations, and even as I say that, about a generalization, it's a generalization. Okay. But I think one of the qualities that connect us universally is human suffering. It sounds terrible to say that. It's human suffering. And it comes in so many different forms. Obviously, mental suffering and physical suffering and emotional suffering. We have suffering, at home. We have suffering in the community. We have suffering in the state, in the country, in the world. It's one of the things that connect us. And for those of us who are steeped in the Christian tradition and within the church, and use and see the Bible as foundational for us in terms of our theology, there's a great deal of suffering that is in the biblical tradition. By the way, if we try to get away from it and sort of, how should we say, edit out the suffering in the Bible, we will end up really with a few pages here and there, okay? Maybe just along the lines of the Jefferson Bible. You know what I'm talking about, right? Right. Okay. But we don't want to do that. We just do not want to do that. And we don't want the church to do that. And some of the things, particularly in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, some of it is really, really difficult. I mean, very, very difficult. And we don't want to simply push it aside. We don't want to sort of cast it aside and say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with that. In the same way, maybe personally, if we know we have an ailment, the idea that if I don't go see the physician or if I don't do something, somehow miraculously it will go away. Now, I'm no physician, but it doesn't work that way. So last time we were here, we left off at a place where I read verses 13 through 19. And what we discover was that much of the suffering that had been anticipated has occurred. And the family, for all practical purposes, the children, sons and daughters, have been wiped out. What constitutes the wealth of Job is gone. It's all gone, okay? And what we notice is that some of it perhaps can be attributed to war, the Chaldeans and the Sabaeans, and they fell, and we talked about the fact that one person in each of the sequences has survived to tell the story. And we don't want to walk away and think, wow, what a lucky guy, okay? It's just the way the story is developed, right? It's a literary form of moving the story forward. That's all it is. And then it ends on this note, which is really quite remarkable. Then Job arose tore his robe, shaved his head, fell on the ground, and worshipped. He said, let me see if I can move it forward. He said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not charge God with wrongdoing. So, for some, I don't mean us in here, who want to read every phrase and every line, literally, this is one of many places where we run into trouble. Okay? Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. Where is there? Literally in your mother's womb, but we know that's not the way it works. Again, I'm no medical person. But being human and all, right? We do have a couple of medical people in my family, and they remind me regularly I'm not a medical person. But I think if I check with them, it would verify that this is not the way it works. But naked shall I return there. Okay? And we, of course, draw conclusions. We build a theological idea of where shall I return. I have come into this world with nothing. I'm going to leave with nothing. Again, that's the way it is. That's the way it is. And therefore, what Job has said, given that, right, blessed be the name of the Lord. This, Job did not just say, you know what, I've lost everything, and that's just the way it is. You know, what am I supposed to do now? He not only that, he worships, and then he blesses the name of the Lord. One might say at this point, right, the very things that the tester, remember the tester, the accuser, right, who, by the way, again, we don't know the identity of this being. Some theologians and some scholars have said this is sort of part of the how should we say, part of the identity of God, that God is the one who also is the tester. Now, before we think that, oh, God can be the tester, the accuser, remember, right, as we just came out of church, and one of the very common translations of the Lord's Prayer, where it says, do not lead us into, okay, it presupposes there is temptation, right? But actually, if you take it much more literally, it would read something what? Do not put us to the test. Right? It's a whole different thing. Remember now, again, the biblical text is both Hebrew and Greek. And we don't have anything original. That, and if someone approaches you and said, do I have a deal for you? I have an original manuscript of the Old Testament. Hang on to your wallet and walk away. Okay? That animal doesn't exist. What we have are copies of copies of copies, and then of translations and so on. And they're not all, as we discovered, right? They're not all, to be honest, accurate. And some that really parade around as paraphrasing the text because it's easy to read that way, well, you know, take a great deal of liberty. So at the end of this, Job is saying, you know what? I will praise God. I will bless God. And Job, in the midst of this, does not do anything that would be classified as wrongdoing. So let's pause. That's the end of chapter 1. Let's pause. If I said to you, and this is somewhat subjective, but I think we have something to go on here. If I said to you, based on chapter 1 alone, how would you describe Job? Just based on chapter 1. Forget about what comes later. Based on chapter 1. Say that again, please. Patiently suffering. Okay? It's reasonable. We know he suffered, right? We know he suffered. And at this point, what kind of suffering did he endure? Almost total of, by the way, as a society, this is one of the sufferings that we can identify with. You know, even though you and I may not want to hear this, for the most part, we are a society of stuff. We love stuff. And then when we have stuff, what do we want? More stuff. And you know that, right? We want new and improved stuff. Okay? Yeah. Some old stuff. And by the time you do that, there is new stuff. Okay? We are people of stuff. Job has lost all of his children and all of his stuff. Interestingly, this is what, for many of us, I don't mean us in this room, constitute what? Wealth and power and greatness. And it's gone. Okay? And in all of this, Job really did not blame God. End of chapter 1. So then, again, my question is, how would you describe Job? He's very patient. He's faithful. Would you say, remember what we looked at the description? That he was a blameless and upright man? Right? And at the end of chapter 1, we feel vindicated, don't we? Right? But chapter 2, of course. So chapter 2 goes like this. See if it rings a bell. One day the heavenly beings, who are these people once again? We have no idea. The Hebrew says, by the way, the Hebrew is more complicated than heavenly beings. The Hebrew says, sons of God. Okay? Sons of God. So, if we think that heavenly beings leaves it a little vague, try to unpack sons of God. But this is what we're told. One day the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser who also came among them to present himself before the Lord said to the accuser, remember the accuser, of course, the Hebrew word is, okay, remember now, it has the definite article, all right? It has the definite article, so this is the title. So the word, the Hebrew word is Satan, of course, which we get Satan from. But remember, this is not a name, this is a title. It's used elsewhere as a name from time to time. But here, it is the tester, it is the adversary. So God says, where have you come from? By the way, as we read this, we should not read this and just sort of say this, oh yeah. I mean, think about, just pause for a second. Think about this. The accuser has come, right? The tester has come, and it's going back and forth, to and fro, and God, in fact, let me ask you, if you had to choose adjectives to describe God, kind of in the classical sense, what adjectives have we used to describe God? That God is what? That God is omnipotent, and it's a fancy word that means or powerful. Okay, what else? That omniscient, which means all-knowing. It's the word that gives us our more common word, science, okay, which simply is a Latin word that means knowledge, okay, scientia, okay, omniscient, all-knowing, okay, and beneficent, right? So God is all-powerful, God is all-knowing, and God is beneficent. Now, we're not going to get into philosophy here, but philosophers would say, can you really have all three if you read the text? So here's the question. If God is omniscient, why is God asking the tester, where have you come from? I've always kind of wondered if like the whole omniscient benevolent thing, what does it mean? likes asking questions. And by the way, if we're in the image of God, we should be able to do what? Ask questions as well. I don't know why we're afraid of asking questions. Okay? Right. When our youngest daughter was about 2, and we had just returned, I had just finished my PhD in Britain, and we had come back and had my first job, and our older son was 5, our daughter at the time, older son was 6, our daughter at the time was 2, and was born actually over in Britain, in Scotland. And one day, one evening, we went out just for dinner, and we had a babysitter who the kids knew very well. And we had certain guidelines in our little apartment, one of which, do not kick or play with the soccer ball in the family room. Which, of course, the babysitter also embraced as something that. So we came home, and our 2-year-old daughter runs to the door and meets me and says, "Dad, Nathan broke the," Nathan is her older brother, "Nathan kicked the ball and broke the little whatever." It was a little Scottish vase. Now, you could describe her as a little snitch, okay? So I didn't say anything, and of course, I walked in, and it's all clean. The ball is one side, and there is no vase, there are no broken parts. And then I began, did anyone kick the ball? What happened with the ball? But I already knew what was going on, right? But we are all playing little mini detectives here. Okay? Why would we ask a question when we know the answer? Is it not to ensure that whoever it is being directed to at least is able to say, "I did it"? Okay? This is where I have come from. This is what I have done. So where have you come from? We already went through this in chapter 1, right? But I have come to and fro, and from going up and down on the earth. The Lord said to the accuser, and here again, right? I have seen and read sort of ministers who have said, it is Satan who has pushed God to do this. But when you read the text, who is it that broaches the subject of Job? It is always God. It is always God. And once again it says, the Lord said to the accuser, "Have you considered my servant Job?" Okay. There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from. Does this sound familiar? Yes. This is what happened in the first round. Right? A blameless and upright man who turns away from evil. And then he's still, I want for us to look at this. What's wrong with, by the way, this is right out of the text. What's wrong with that statement? Anything, or let me rephrase that. Do you see anything that is maybe a little off in this statement? One cannot persist in one's integrity? One does not, but one can. Okay? But Job does. To to persist in integrity. Okay. Who says this though? It's just God. This is not, by the way, when you and I do not run around and say, I just want to let you know I've been persisting in my integrity. We don't do that. You know. I mean, if anyone says that, you know they need help. We do not say that. You know, now we know people in our country who say that, right? But, you know, there's never been a greater man than me. But generally, others may say, in this case, as we said last time, when I say to you that you're blameless and upright, you may take that as, you know, that's a very sweet and loving thing to say. But when God says that about you, right, you're taking that to the bank. So God is saying he still persists in his integrity. But although you incited me against him to destroy him for no reason. Really? Is that what happened? No. And by the way, you have the text, and I have the text. Did the accuser really incite God? And by the way, if this is all it takes to incite God, that God is going to say, you know, you're inciting me a lot. I'm going to show you. I'm going to go ahead and destroy X or Y to show you. Really? But Satan, remember, the tester said, the only reason, and by the way, think of the universal implication of this. The only reason you think he is blameless and upright, the only reason you have placed him on a pedestal is why? You have protected him. You have given him stuff. Right? And that's why he loves you. I mean, it's a very cynical thing, isn't it? Right? The only reason Job loves you the way Job loves you is because, what? You have given him stuff and you protect him. But take away his stuff and what will happen? Right? Gesundheit. He will desert you just like that. It's very cynical, isn't it? I mean, where is the love? So who wins the first round here? God. God could easily say, you know what? I told you so. I told you that he would not abandon me. But the tester is not finished. He still persists in his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him for no reason. Don't think so. Then the accuser answered the Lord, skin for skin. That's a kind of an ancient idea, right? Skin for skin. Let's get physical. All that the man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to the accuser, very well, he's in your power, only spare his life. Now, keep in mind again, right? Who controls the boundaries of power here? God. God is saying you can take away all of the stuff from chapter 1, everything, material possessions and his family, but you may not touch him physically. And that happened. Okay? Here, God is saying you may do with him physically whatever you want, except don't kill him. Okay? Torture to your heart's desire, but let him live. Yeah. Sure. Well, yeah, but here's the thing. Who causes the suffering of Job? In the first instance, to lose everything. One could say one could say, war, Sabaeans, Chaldeans, they came down, they destroyed, but also who brought the wind and all of the sort of the natural wonders of this world to come down on Job? He was given, he was told, but who gives him the power? It's God who controls the power. In other words, by the way, we won't get to this because it's too much into the poetry section of Job. But there are sections that says, I am the one, right, who commanded the oceans to come thus far and no further. I am the one. In other words, I have established the boundaries. And the boundaries of power here is that you may do this, but you may not do this. I'm giving you permission, and you can control. And this is why so many scholars believe that the accuser is very much a kind of a part of the divine, if you will, as opposed to some other being who is running up and down. So, if you attack him physically, right? Now we have upped the ante here, right? The tester says he will curse you to your face. I mean, you go after him physically, he will curse you to your face. And God says, okay then, do it, with one stipulation: you can't kill him. Here is where it gets, if we think so far it's been confusing, here it gets really complicated. Okay? He will curse you to your face. Only spare his life. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen, I want everyone to be able to see this. There is there's a Hebrew word that consists of two letters. Okay? And this, it could be translated, or this looks like chai. It isn't. It's kai. It's that hard K sound. Okay? And occasionally, you might even see it as part of a jewelry. I don't know, have you ever seen this? Right? It's sometimes as part of a jewelry, and when it's part of a jewelry, they simply connect these two. Okay? And it's a lovely saying in Hebrew, and it simply means life. Kai. It means life. It's the word for life. So, for example, if you and I were toasting, and let's say with an adult beverage, and let's call that champagne, and we lift our glasses, and we want it to be sort of very Hebraic, we would not say cheers or skol. We would say l'chaim, to life, l'chaim. And the im at the end is just plural, all right? It's the masculine plural in Hebrew, l'chaim. We have a lot of im words, right? Remember, seraphim, cherubim, all of those im words. Elohim, which is much more complicated because it's the plural word for God, but we always translate it as singular. Okay? So here, it means life. But there are two things I want for us to note here. In this text, that's not the word that is used when it says only spare his life. The word that is used is the second word, and it's pronounced nephesh. And it's profound, because sometimes it's used in reference to God as well. But nephesh is the stuff that gives us life. Okay? So, for example, if I were standing here, this would not work, but use your imagination, or lying down, right? and I look exactly the way I am right now, but I'm not breathing, would you consider that I'm alive? By the way, you're not going to hurt my feelings here. So, okay, that's very kind of you. But from every other medical indication, I would be dead. Why we don't even want to use the word dead? I would have gone. Okay? But I look exactly the way I am right now. What's the difference? I do not have the stuff that has to do with life. You remember Genesis? The human being was formed, but when did the human being become human? When God breathed into them what in Hebrew is referred to as the ruach, right? And in Greek, which is much more common because we know the Greek word, even though you may not think you know the Greek word, you do. It's the word that gives us, it's pronounced pneuma, and it's the word that gives us pneumonia. Okay, it's the same word, all right? Right? We don't pronounce the P obviously in English, but in Greek we do. So here's the deal. Nephesh is that stuff that gives us life. So even though you beat up on Job, even though you destroy him, even though you do everything, right? You may not, you must not, you cannot take away the stuff that constitutes life, the nephesh. Or we translate it as, let him live. But it's more than that. But then there's something else that is happening in this text that has baffled scholars. And by the way, I'll tell you right now, it hasn't ended. The word, let's see if I have this up here. The word that is used here, if you can believe this, he will curse you to your face. Let me tell you what this does not mean. Okay? This is not swearing. Right? This is much more of a technical way of talking about blessing and curse. Right? This is not about swearing. So we have to sort of not just push that to the side, we have to discard that entirely. So curse, now that we know that, what do you imagine this means? It's there. I haven't changed anything. I promise you I have not edited this text. What do you think that could possibly mean, to curse someone to your face, to their face? Any idea? Okay, asking God. By the way, it's a good question, and that's a human existential question, right? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? And it's one of those questions that you're not going to look in an index and find an answer, which means that we have to have the courage sometimes to live with the question. It is not. So the issue has never been temptation. The issue has always been what? It's the Y word, which is yielding. The issue is not about temptation. Okay? The issue is about yielding. There's an acknowledgement that there's going to be temptation. But what do you do with it? Well, that's the question. Okay? So here is the thing about curse. That's not what the Hebrew says. Now you have two choices here. Well, let me back up. You have at least two choices here. You can believe me, or you can go check. Not only the Hebrew doesn't say curse, even more dramatically, the Hebrew says bless. The Hebrew word that is used there is the word that is common in Hebrew for bless. By the way, anyone? knows what that word is? Actually, you do know what that word is. You just don't know that you know what that word is. Kind of like pneumonia. You know what the word is, and when I tell you, you say, oh yeah. Anyone? There's a prayer there's a prayer, a lot in Judaism, I guess, mostly, but it's part of our Christian tradition as well, that it's a prayer in Hebrew that begins, Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, O Lord. Okay, and it goes on, King of the universe and so on, right? It's a beautiful prayer, Baruch atah Adonai. Okay, see the word? The Hebrew word for bless or blessing is Barak or Baruch. Okay? Now, you remember the scribe of Jeremiah, his name? Jeremiah had a scribe. The book is lost, but he had a scribe because the scribe, the reason he is called a scribe, he used to, write, take the notes. And his name was Baruch. Okay? If you're familiar, maybe all of us, there is a college in New York that is called Baruch College. Okay? That's the word that is used here. So what do we do with this? It makes sense to have him say, he will curse God and die. But what do you do when it says, he will Baruch or Barak God and die? And by the way, Barak is simply the Arabic version of Baruch. Okay? We have many, many overlapping. If you're traveling in Israel or you're greeting someone in Hebrew and you say, Shalom Aleichem, okay? Peace be unto you, okay? It's exactly the same thing as what? Salam Alaikum. Okay, it's the same root, same words, just different in the way it's expressed. But we'll get to this. So curse God and die. That's what he says. So the accuser went out from the presence of the Lord, inflicted loathsome sores on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And Job took a potsherd with which to scrape himself and sat among the ashes. Now, there's no explanation whether he's doing that because of the sores, because of the itch. We don't know. This is what he did. And he sat among the ashes. Now, think about this, right? He has lost everything. Everything. And now, he is a person who is physically totally torn apart. And he's sitting in what the Hebrew describes as an ash dump. That's it. And we have only gone into 1.5 chapters of Job. From the greatest man of the East, with everything at his disposal, to someone who has lost everything and now sits in an ash dump. And then sat among the ashes. And then we get to verses 9 and 10, which I will read to you. Then his wife said to him, do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die. Not really nice. Then his wife said to him, do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as any foolish woman would speak. And terrible translation there. The foolish here is not like, I didn't know better. You're speaking as someone who has no moral grounding here. That's really the concept. Shall we receive the good from God and not receive the evil? In all of this, Job did not sin with his lips. By the way, you see how this is a little bit of a difference from the end of the first chapter? Let me remind you, the first chapter said, and in all of this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. The second chapter sort of gets to the end by saying, in all of this, Job did not sin with his lips. and one can begin to extrapolate. Is there something going on within him? But he doesn't say anything. Now, I want to say a word about Mrs. Job here. And I have changed my perspective about this, I have to tell you. Now, we don't know her name, hence Mrs. Job. And sometimes the Hebrew Bible, with notable exceptions, often leave the naming of women out of the narrative. Like Noah, remember? His wife and 3 daughters. Okay. His wife and daughters-in-law. We don't know who they are. So here is the thing. This is the only place in the 42 chapters where she's present. There is no other place. This is it. She has one moment. This is her moment. This is her 15 minutes of fame. Curse God and die. Now, several years ago, I remember reading this and thinking, what? This is what you come up with? You've had time to see all of this, and finally you have a moment in time, right? And this is what, come on now. I've changed my mind over the last several years. Why do you think she would say something like this? It's the same word here. It's blessing. So here, she says, curse God and die, but the Hebrew doesn't say curse. Is she being sarcastic? Job, go ahead and bless God and die anyway. But it says, curse God and die. But clearly, Job must know what she means, because look at his response, right? It's her only moment. But I've changed my perspective. Were you going to say something? No, I've changed my perspective about this, yes. She doesn't want to have him suffer. She doesn't want to see him suffer anymore, because there's every indication, right? Keep in mind, in those days, the woman's identity is entirely wrapped up and shaped, right? Whether you're a mother, whether you're a wife, whether you're a daughter, in the context of your husband, your father, your son. And somewhere along the line, maybe when we have an opportunity, and I haven't worn out my welcome, we will do a study in the book of Ruth, and you will see all of those things come into play. So here's the thing. She has seen the suffering of her entire family. She has lost everything along with Job. She has lost all of whatever property there might have been, welfare. She has lost her children. She probably has lost the community. You know, it happens, right? And she's now looking at her husband sitting in an ash dump. What is she supposed to say? And are we in a position to say, come on now, Mrs. Job, chin up, as the British would say. That's the only time. And Job says, no, I'm not giving in. Or in his heart. And we will never know for a while. Oh, we will discover in a moment. But remember now, who is being tested here? Job. Job. Now we can extrapolate and say it's his wife by extension, right? But this is about Job. This is about Job. And the thing about it, think about this, right? I'm punishing Job by doing what? Killing his children. And you have to pause and say, excuse me, what do we do? Yeah, okay, okay, we were drinking and partying. But really, is that why you died? But they're all part of Job's identity. And this is how it ends here. By the way, I have this up here. And the reason, these are two words transliterated from the Hebrew, Arur and Barak, or Baruch, sometimes depending on how one conjugates it, right? Now, the reason I have that up there is that sometimes when we sort of translate and transition words, we could make mistakes, right? I'll give you an example. I don't want this to turn into a Hebrew 101 class or anything, but okay, those are three different letters in Hebrew. Those are three different letters in Hebrew. Okay? You can see where one could make a little bit of a mistake with any of these, right? If you push this out a little too much, it's a K ending. If you leave it like that, it's N. But it's not an N that works in the middle of the word. It's an N that comes in the end of the... Okay, we don't want to get confused here. But the point is, we can make mistakes. And how do we know that? Mistakes have been made. We can see it in manuscripts. All right. So up here we see Arur. That's the word for curse. There is no mistake here. It's not like, I could see maybe where there's a letter that is off. It's very different. It's very different. One is Arur, curse. One is Baruch, bless. There is no confusion here. Even if you're sleeping and writing this stuff, there is no confusion. Curse God and die. And then we get to the friends of Job. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. You've heard of the friends of Job, right? You've heard of these friends? I want you to tell me what you think after I read this here. Now when Job's three friends heard of all these troubles that had come upon him, each of them set out from his home. Eliphaz, the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite. They met together to go and to console and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices and wept aloud. They tore their robes, they threw dust in the air upon their heads. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. The three friends of Job. What do you think of these friends? Just based on what I have just read. Very good friends. Very good friends. What else? Loving and compassionate, present. The two things they came to do for Job were what? To console and to comfort. And both of those words overlap in meaning. And essentially, to comfort means to do what? We know these words, we just, again, don't realize we know them. Come as in with, all of those come words like compassion. And fort, which of course we know means what? Strength, as in fort, so-and-so, as in fortitude, whatever. They came to console and comfort. no immediate family. Now, here's the thing. You notice there's no one from the community here. His friends came from afar. Now, we don't know what kind of a phone system they had at the time, but they clearly showed up because they heard about this. And they did something, I want to quickly say this. They did a couple of things that I believe are instructive for us. They came and they sat for 7 days and 7 nights. Why 7? It's the biblical concept of what? That which is complete, right? We know that. They did that. And what did they do? They did something that many of us have a remarkably difficult time doing. They sat silently. They sat silently, right? Many of us, I don't mean us in this room, but many of us desperately want to say something and, you've got to move on, right? Let me explain why this happened to you. Okay? And by the way, most of the time we have no idea why this happened to you. But we are saying this because we cannot deal with the silence. We cannot deal with the idea, right? So we want you to move on so that we can move on. Because we don't know what to do with this. But they sat for 7 days and 7 nights. But also they joined him in that moment. They didn't say, you know what? Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar did not say, this has been a long journey. We're going to go and check in on a hotel over here, right? And we'll come back and see how you are tomorrow. No. They enter into his suffering. By the way, that's really what the word compassion means. Literally, pardon me, it's with suffering. It's to enter into the suffering of. That's why in a time gone by, instead of Passion Sunday, we used to refer, instead of Palm Sunday, just give it away. Instead of Palm Sunday, we used to refer to that Sunday as what? Passion Sunday, right? Many places still use that word. Compassion, enter into the suffering. Console literally means with soothing. And they did not speak a word to him because his suffering was so great, and they simply sat with him 7 days and 7 nights. And the two things here, presence and silence. I want to be clear. I believe there has to be, for many of us, a conspicuous and privileged place of silence in such moments. When we do not have answers to life's sort of remarkable and grand questions about human suffering. Now, let me just say this. For me to say, quote, that's God's will, places me in a place where I don't want to be. I do not want to be the person who dictates that. Do I know that? Okay. Do I know that? Do we really want someone, and I'll just call out the name because it's been public, someone like the Reverend Franklin Graham? When Katrina happened, and there was great suffering, and he said, this is God's punishment for your lifestyle. You can go and check. Or when we had this tsunami, was it Indonesia? This is God's punishment because you're Muslim. By the way, this is not just audacity. This is audacity on steroids. To be able to think that, if you don't mind, excuse me, I'll speak on behalf of God here. I'll leave you with this. I'll give you a name of one of my favorite authors, who is German. And his name is Rainer Maria Rilke. Does that name ring a bell? Rilke? Okay. One of his most famous books is called Letters to a Young Poet, okay, which are actually letters to a young person, actual letters. Okay. And this guy would write to Rilke and ask him all kinds of questions, and he would respond. And in one of those correspondences, in one of those letters, he's asking large existential questions about love and so on. And Rilke says 4 words: live the questions now. And then he goes on to say, in time you will be able to find the answers, but do not rush the questions when you don't know what the appropriate answer is. Live the questions. Have the courage to live the questions. And Job is going to have to live with this. And now, as I'm about to wrap up, here's the thing. Yep. This is in preparation for next time. The homework, not homework. We go straight into poetry after this. And you remember, the friends are now silent. Okay? When chapter 3 opens, guess what? The floodgates open. Essentially, Job begins to wonder the very question that we wonder sometimes, which is, why is this happening to me? It's not fair. It's not right. And God, if you want to fight with me, show up. Be careful what you ask for. And that is a curse. Be careful what you ask for, you might just get it. Okay? And Job says, if you want to fight with me, show up and fight. I'll give you a hint. God does show up in chapter 38. Okay? It does not end well. All right. I know we're out of time. Let's stop there. We have one more session on Job, and then we'll talk a little bit about Hannah on our 4th Sunday. All right. Thanks, everyone.